In this video, I am revising to calculate the gross pay of an employee such that if an employee works more than 40 hours, then their gross pay is going to be calculated based on time and a half. We're using a decision construction or the if statement to determine if an employee works less than or equal to 40 hours. We would merely, outside the conditional, display the employee's name, display the hours worked by the employee, their pay rate, their gross pay, and the program will end. Otherwise, what's going to happen is if the employee is working more than 40 hours per week, the gross pay will be calculated differently to include time and a half. We will calculate the regular hours, overtime pay, regular pay, gross pay. Then we're going to display the regular hours, overtime pay, regular pay, and gross pay. So this is pretty much what the pseudocode would look like when you revise the gross pay program. More specifically, if the employee works less than or equal to the 40 hours per week, we would display the employee's name. That'll be done regardless to both conditions. Display the hours worked by the employee, display the employee's pay rate, display the employee's gross pay. Otherwise, we're going to make sure that the regular hours are recorded as 40 hours a week. Overtime hours is going to be the hours worked minus the 40 hours, just to isolate that. We're going to calculate the overtime pay by multiplying the overtime pay times the quantity of the pay rate times 1.5. The regular pay is going to be 40 times the pay rate. Then we're going to add the gross pay is going to be calculated by adding the regular pay and the overtime pay. Next, we'll display the regular hours the person worked, their overtime hours, their pay rate, the regular pay, and the overtime pay. These are the requirements. And you'll notice that if this condition is true, all the statements that are indented are going to be executed. Otherwise, the opposite of less than or equal to 40 is going to be greater than 40. That's how the computer is going to calculate. The hours worked has to be greater than 40. If that is the case, we want to calculate the regular hours, overtime pay, regular pay. The gross pay is going to be adding the regular pay plus the overtime pay together. And then we display again the regular hours worked, the overtime hours, the pay rate, the regular pay, and the overtime pay. A closer look at the pseudocode reveals that when a condition is true, the statements that are indented are going to get executed. Otherwise, the alternative is going to get executed, and then we end the program. Suppose a person worked 40 hours a week. Then the program is supposed to display the employee's name, display the hours they worked, the employee's pay rate, and the gross pay, and then it is going to move down and the program ends, or whatever statements follow, that's what happens, and then the program will end. If the hours worked are greater than 40, then all these statements that are indented has to get executed. We end the if construction. That's what I should put down here. In the if construct. And then all the statements following that will get executed. Statement 1, statement 2, etc. Any of those are going to get executed. And then we end the program. The program ends. Okay, so let's actually look at the Python version of this program. So let's look at the gross pay program where we're using an if statement. What is different is that we add more variables that we're going to be using that will store calculations. It's always a good idea to erase anything that may be in the memory locations where we're reserving these variable names and set them to 0. That's what's happening there. The input operation is the same. And the gross pay is equal to hours worked times the pay is pretty much the same. Although we could place it inside the if statement. We still have our headings for our report. I just made it 80 across versus 40 or 60. Now here's what's different. The gross pay will differ depending on the number of hours worked. And that's what our if statement or decision is based on. If, you see that's all lowercase if, and it's in amber color, orange, that means that's a control construction in Python. If the hours worked is less than or equal to 40, we can print the hours worked, the pay rate, and the gross pay. Otherwise, the opposite of less than or equal to is greater than. We could have said else if hours worked is greater than 40, but that's redundant. It's implied. If it's not less than or equal to, it has to be greater than. Then we calculate, and it doesn't matter which order this is in. I think I may have said, I'll just move it. It doesn't matter. I'll just move this up. What matters is that if this condition is true, all the statements that are supposed to be executed must be indented. In Python, the first column is 0, the second one is 4. So follow that. The way you know that is if you go on the options and choose configure idle. If you click on Windows, it'll say the indent spaces 4 is the standard. So keep it at 4. Don't make it 1 or 2 because it's very difficult to determine whether or not you're indented. It should be the default for indenting is 4. That's under Windows, the Windows menu. So what happens essentially is as long as the hours worked is less than 40, first outside of the if statement, the report is going to be displayed the employee's name. Next, if this hours worked is less than or equal to 40, the hours worked, that line is going to be printed, the pay rate, and the gross pay. Otherwise, we want to make sure the regular hours still shows as 40, but the overtime hours we're going to calculate. Overtime hours is equal to hours worked minus 40. Overtime pay is equal to overtime hours times pay rate times 1.5. That's the quantity of that in closing parentheses. Regular pay is going to equal to, we could have said regular hours times 40. So we can actually change that. Reg hours times pay rate. Gross pay is going to be overtime pay plus the pay rate. So this is only going to be executed, the second indented set of lines. We're going to display the regular hours that the person works, their overtime hours, their pay rate, regular pay, overtime pay, and the gross pay. And you could use different ways to display the results, but they should be organized and outlined. They don't necessarily have to be centered. I just did that. So if everything is true, starting at line 47 all the way down to 69 is going to get executed. And you know, it's a good idea to go on and say in the if construct, because that's where it ends. The last indented line is where it ends. And then if there are other lines to be executed, the program is going to go following that and perform those tasks at hand. So once again, lines 47 through 69 are only going to be executed if the lines 35 condition is not true. And this is like a Boolean operation. If all of this is true, then all of this gets done. And if that's the case, the computer skips all the else's, go down to the end of the line, prints a horizontal line 80 times, 80 dashes, and the program ends. Let's run the program. Okay, we will run the program. And we'll say Sarah Jones. She worked 40 hours and she gets $35.50 an hour. Employee report. Employee name Sarah Jones. Hours worked 40. Pay rate $35.50 and the gross pay. And of course, this is without the deductions that they take out of our pay. But that's the whole idea. We're just giving you a basic gross pay program. Let's run the program again. This time, we're going to enter Sarah Jones' name again. She worked 55 hours a week. She still gets $35.50. And as you can see now, the regular hours were 40, her overtime 15 rather. Pay rate $35.50. Regular pay was $1,420, just like it was up there. But this time she's got overtime pay, and you add that all up together, and she has the gross pay. This is a pretty decent example using the if construction. Make sure you understand that we say if, the Boolean conditional followed by a colon, the program indents, all the statements following that will get executed. Otherwise, if that condition is not true, an alternate number of statements are going to be executed. The ends construction ends, and then statements following that gets executed. Please study this program very carefully, and you may take it apart, put it back together, make changes to it, do whatever you want, as long as you understand the purpose of the if construction. That's most important.